Name that movie. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I love this moment in this movie. I had to do some editing so that it was a little less scary, because I remember it terrifying me when I was younger. But I love this moment. They've been searching for what they believe is the Holy Grail, the cup that Jesus used in the Last Supper with his disciples. And they believe that it gives you immortality. And so they go into this room, and he's there, and there's this knight that's 900 years old, and the bad guy comes in, and of course they choose what would be the cup that the Son of God, the King of Kings, would use. It's gold, it's ornate, it's covered in jewels. That must be the right one. But it wasn't. The right one was the cup of a humble carpenter, the cup of the one who Jesus really was. So for several weeks, we've been going through kind of a long series called The Bad Habits of Jesus. And what we're recognizing is that Jesus so often had these actions, these habits, these things that didn't really fit with the culture. People didn't like what he did, and that's what ultimately led to his execution on the cross. But he did all these things that people didn't understand or didn't like. And honestly, naturally, we kind of would be the same way. What he doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. He loved to party. He hung out with the wrong people. He spent way too much time with women and with children. He broke the rules. He told stories that didn't make sense. He did all these things that just didn't fit with the way that people traditionally look at the world. Today we're going to continue. Next week we're actually going to conclude our series on the bad habits of Jesus. And we've been again studying the character of Christ, and what we've learned over and over again is his bad habits need to become our bad habits, because they're not bad habits at all. But this week we look at, as I told the kids, that Jesus focused on the little things. He focused on the normal things, not the extravagant. There's a haiku that says, "To see small matters and to see that small matters are not small matters." Leonard Sweet says this: Jesus loved to tell stories that captured the ordinary moments of life. He tells of fishermen sorting fish, merchants searching for pearls, farmers plowing fields and harvesting crops, day laborers separating wheat from darnel, lepers begging food, shepherds minding flocks, women mending clothes, parents throwing parties and children playing games, kids fighting in village greens, women kneading dough, neighbors borrowing foodstuffs, burglars plundering homes, debtors struggling to pay loans, stewards managing households, young men leaving home for greener pastures, and lovers getting married. In every Jesus story, the numinous is in the normal. The holy haunts the mundane. The minuscule can be magisterial. Naturally, we often think that the normal areas of our life aren't that important. It's the major events that we look to. The special moments are worth noting, but not Jesus at all. He cares about the little things. This morning, we're going to look at 3 different ways that Jesus focuses on the minors in order to teach us about the majors. And as we do, we're going to look at some of the ways that Jesus points out culture. The first one, it's not how much you give, but out of what spirit do you give it. It reminds me of a favorite commercial in my house. If you're looking for a mower, it's not how fast you mow, but how well you mow fast, according to John Deere. It's said all the time in my house. It's not how fast you mow, it's how well you mow fast. This morning we see it's not how much you give, but out of what spirit. In Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 41, this is what it says. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. It's interesting, our culture, and pretty much every culture, celebrates wealth and power and the people that have it. We do that. This summer, one of the big ones of those was The Wedding. Now, here's the question. How many of you watched The Wedding? Meghan Markle and Harry and the royal family. How many of you watched The Wedding, even though it was early in the morning or had to watch it in reruns shown later? We get so caught up in following the wealthy and the powerful. And I remember I was saying to Katie, I'm so sick of my Good Morning America time being taken up by The Wedding because I don't care. But so often we get caught up, and it's not just the royals in England, it's also the wealthy and the celebrity in our own country. We celebrate being those people. Sometimes even in our churches we celebrate that to a fault. I remember a friend in another community that pastored a church, and he was telling a group of us pastors, he said, we just got this new digital sign at our church, and we've been wanting it for a while. And so what I did was I just stood up in front of church and I said, if somebody will give us the $20,000 it costs to get this new sign, I'll put your name right up there as big as you want it so we can have that sign on the outside of our building. Even in the church, sometimes we celebrate the wealthy, the ones that can give great things. But Jesus did not care about the gifts of the wealthy. When he watched people giving in the temple, he saw the wealthy bringing their money. You could tell when the people that gave a lot were there, and likely they were fine with you being able to see them give a lot. But instead, what Jesus points out is the value in the gift of the poor. Because what Jesus cared about was not the extravagant, was not the great gift. What he cared about was what was happening in giving. I'm giving what I have, and in her case, all that I have, back to God. He cared about why she gave, not what she gave. And so often in our lives, it's the same. He cares about what we're doing and why we're doing it. He doesn't seek out the great big gifts, but instead calls us to follow him and to give to him the everyday. The second one. In our house, we have this sign that we just got a few weeks ago. And it fits us very well, because if you know my family, we're not big people. And so we have this new sign that says, it's not how big you are, but how big you play. And so we love sports and we love to play them, but again, usually my kids are the smallest on the team. It's not how big you are, but how big you play. Matthew chapter 13, verse 31 to 35, as Shelley read for us a little while ago, tells us of the mustard seed. He told them this parable: the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of all seeds, when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Mustard tree is interesting, and if you might associate it with mustard like we put on our hot dogs, and that's not where it comes from. But mustard seeds are tiny. I mean, barely seeable seeds. They're very small. And yet, they grow wild throughout the Middle East, so it's something that Jesus could point to that they would have seen everywhere. And they get to about 25 feet, so they get to be a pretty significant tree. The tree takes advantage of damp conditions, but can actually survive on fewer than 8 inches of rainfall in a year. So you take this tiny little nothing seed, you plant it in the ground with very little water, and it can survive into a 25-foot tree where birds can land and people can seek shade. Tiny seeds lead to strong trees that can survive on little. It's interesting because it reminds us that the kingdom of God didn't come with a conquering king to war with the kingdoms of the world for domination. Jesus didn't come with a big sword and a chariot ready to take over everything. Instead, we get this king who came as a poor child to humble parents, was raised in modest Nazareth, and lived as a carpenter. And then the people he chose to teach and to heal and to call were regular people. Not the wealthy, not the impressive, the regular people. That's who he ministered to. That's who he spent his time with. Our King is not impressed by social standing or economic success. He is the king of the tiny seed that grows in little water. He's the king that in his Last Supper used a modest cup with his disciples, because that's the life that Jesus lived, the life that he chose that led to the cross. Finally, Jesus teaches us about his focus on the little things, the menial things, that it's not about how much you got, but what you do with it. In Matthew 25, starting in verse 14, it says this. Again, it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. And his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's kind of a tough story. At least it ends really tough. This man, as Jesus says, leaves money with his servants, and with each one, there's obviously an expectation that they do something with it. That they not just hold it for him, but do something that benefits him. And the first 2 do well. And the third one, out of fear, hides it and comes back with only what was given. Now, this story really isn't about money, but it is about responsibility. And we know it really wasn't about money, because if you continue in this chapter, it goes on. And Jesus, next, after telling this parable, he says, the king will gather his people together, his sheep and his goats. It says in verse 34, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Jesus isn't really talking about money. What he's talking about is preparing for his return. And preparing for his return is like preparing for your day. You know what works really well? Get up and make your bed first. Get up and do the menial, normal, everyday things for the sake of his coming. What that means is Jesus cares about all that we do. Not so much what we do, but what we're doing it for. So So this isn't about making God more money, making your master more money. What this parable is about is being responsible with what God has given us so that when he returns, he can see what we have done with it. It means that it matters, the normal life. It doesn't mean you have to go, in none of those circumstances, even the person with 5 bags of gold, he got 5 bags more, but he didn't get 10, he didn't get 20, he didn't get millions. He was responsible with what he was given. The reality is we're all given different things. We have different physical gifts, mental gifts. We have different giftedness in terms of what we've been born into and the things that are available to us. But Jesus says, be responsible with what you've been given. So that in doing the little things for Christ, we'll see successes for the kingdom. Doesn't matter what you were given. What matters is what you've done with it. What we see with Jesus is that he doesn't care at all about earthly success. He wants us to shift our focus, to quit idolizing the big and the pretty and the powerful and the successful, because they, like the grail made of gold and diamonds, just bring nothing but death. But instead he wants us to seek the real, the humble, the normal, the everyday, like the grail of a carpenter, modest and regular. Jesus saw the holy in all of it. So as you make your bed, as you take care of your family, as you go to work, as you drive down the road, as you do the menial jobs of life, we have an opportunity to pay attention to them and to do them for God's glory. To see that holiness happens even in those things when we do them with him. And when we do, we're more like him. We're more like Jesus. And we have the opportunity to be an impact in this world for him. Let's pray.